Afternoon. Welcome. We're going to go through, we're from Retail Reply. How you doing? We're from Retail Reply. We're going to go through practical adoption of generative AI for retailers and our experience, what we're seeing out there. So if we can go, we'll go. All right. So a bit of an introduction. My name's Oren Menachem. I'm an associate partner with Retail Reply. Been with Reply for about 8 odd years. I'm a Kiwi, that's the accent. I'll try and speak slow. Apologies for any swearing. And so I tend to deal with technology. Been in retail, border sector for a wee while, telco. But I tend to look at science and the interplay with how do we actually use it. What are we going to do? Where's it going to help our day-to-day? Where's it going to help a retailer? Where's it going to help industry? So that's broadly me. I'll pass over to Michael.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm Michael Cruz. As Oren mentioned, yeah, so I work with Retail Reply as well. I've been a consultant there for a couple of years now, but I'm really focusing on like spatial computing. So we're talking about VR and XR, and also kind of metaverse concepts. But now, especially with kind of the trends that we're seeing, generative AI in that context, but also outside. So kind of how can we leverage generative AI in customer experience in all these contexts, but also in kind of this new tech space as well.
All right, so the blurb that was put forward around what we're going to talk about is as it says up there. So where it's going to be used, how it's transforming, what we're actually seeing out in industry today. So what's actually occurring. I won't go through it. I'll prefer to actually look at the exam question. So when Michael and I were asked to look at this, we sort of thought about it. Generative AI is everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. Why are we here? Everyone has an opinion. I'm sure that everybody has their own view on it and where it's being tuned. So we wanted to try and give a view of what we're seeing, what's real, what's actually in the retail space. And so the questions that we wanted to answer were, where can it help? Where is it actively being worked on? What's the differences between customers and retailers from the use of technology? What are the gotchas? Where's it going? And how do you nudge it in a direction that is going to be beneficial? Context. What do customers go through? So broadly, customers go through 5 distinct stages of the journey. I have a need. I need to recognize that need. I then go and evaluate what my options are. I form a decision evaluation criteria. I then go and execute, and then I have buyer's remorse or enjoyment. I then have to understand what it is I've got and how it's actually going to work. So we'll run through that at different paces. We'll run through using different technology sets to help us. We might go look at catalogs, we might go into store, but we all have different styles and approaches to it. So what we're seeing is that for each stage, there's different levels of maturity, different levels of experimentation. Key point, so they're the green points. Key points that we're seeing. Generative AI is no longer an option. It's no longer academic, it's not the purview of startups. It's real, it's here, it's actually being used where I can cite some examples of where we're actually deploying and experimenting in live. The second key point is it's becoming democratized. So it's not a technology set that is still state level, corporate, minis, small, medium enterprises. It's available for all. So the democratization is actually driving a lot of behavior. A number of years ago, we did an inevitable truths bit of analysis. What's it going to look like in 10 years? When we look back as to what is actually going to be in play. And one of the factors that came out was generative AI as agents for customers to proxy, to coordinate intent into retailers. So what experiments are we actually playing with? What are we seeing? What's actually being used? Agent-based research. So we're all familiar with chatbots. We're all familiar with organizations spinning up different forms, be it voice, be it text, be it actual avatars that you're interacting with. So that's just being refined. Synthesis is interesting because we're actually starting to see more intent analysis. I'm asking for what should I wear to a wedding in summer when it says formal? I don't know. there's no page out there that tells me. I need a synthesis of different options to bring it together to give me that insight. So we're seeing plugins, we're seeing generation of how do we actually give that intent to break down sort of analysis. The next, outcome evaluation. So once we see customers have a number of options available, what criteria is available? And so we're seeing more work on how differentiation, how intent can map into product differentiation. And then the final point is post-product evaluation. Once you bought it, how do I use it? Is it working? Is it broken? Do I need to send it back? Do I need to talk to someone to help me to use it? And we're seeing more and more, and it's akin to the agent-based research. So these are an active experimentation. Some of these are more advanced than others, but we have work that we're dealing with on each of these topics. I think that's over to you, Michael.
Yeah. So we just talked a bit about the customers, and you can see already that it's so democratized in a sense because everybody has now access to LLMs and can kind of get data and get information in a very different format than we used to have previously. So it's a very conversational experience. So we're going to talk a bit more about how retailers are experimenting with it. So these are some cases that we've seen. There's obviously so much more that you can do and potential for kind of future developments in the space. So I think, the concept of being able to inject kind of intelligence to a lot of the systems we have right now is really kind of a really nice proposal, right? We really like the idea of kind of automating solutions that we have, improving existing solutions with that kind of, smarter processes, being able to kind of have a more, unique experience per user because we have the bandwidth to do it thanks to generative AI. So we kind of broke it down into two different sections, and I think I'm going to we'll go through them. But the first one is kind of customer focused. So talking here about the kind of the customer experience and customer service. So Oren already mentioned kind of the chatbot aspect of it, right? So we talk about generic chatbots like ChatGPT, where you can have conversations about anything. But then we also talk about individual retailers having their own kind of more fine-tuned, more controlled model system that they can actually have conversations with, and you're now having a much more personal and potentially kind of complex conversation with an agent that you would only previously been able to do with through support desk with an actual person on the other side. So you can have a lot more of that sort of back and forth, but even beyond that, you start getting a deeper understanding of the intent behind the customer, right? What do they want to do? What is the purpose kind of visiting your store? So I think that gives you a lot more to work with, right? And then that goes kind of more onto the sort of personalized recommendations, right? So here we now have the ability to create almost like a unique marketing scheme and plan for specific users or specific groups of users. So what we're seeing now is this ability means that you can really kind of push to users recommendations, kind of vouchers, and sort of this sort of personalized marketing that is really specific to the intent and kind of the context of the user. So we talked about, if you're going traveling, you understand the context of the location they're going, the LLM can actually build a kind of an image of what the current user flow is. The other aspect as well is substitutions. So, you go to a shop, you try and find a product, the product isn't there. It's quite hard, and I think if any of you have done online grocery shopping and they substitute something for you, and you're like, who thought that was a good substitution? It's not always about the product itself and finding the closest fit of what that product is. It's more about thinking what the user is trying to achieve by getting the product, right, or the service. So what's the intent behind it? So again, that goes back to the same topic. And then in terms of recommendations, that's another big aspect, because we talk about when a user has a direct interaction with you and is purchasing products. So how can we use that information about what product they're purchasing, the intent that we already have, to kind of give them different products that can go together with what they already have. So help them in the process. So whether they buy a flight somewhere, then they can have directions to purchase kind of products that help them in that experience or that context. And I'm going to hand over to Oren because he's got some interesting cases there.
So thanks. One of the examples, a couple of months ago, one of our clients had a recommendation engine that was going end of life. added real cash to the business, chunky coin. It was end of life. It was just going to die. The interesting thing for me was spinning up a team quickly. 0 to third prod release was about 3 weeks. Off-the-shelf componentry. Start the experiment with what you can assemble as quickly as possible. What we were finding was we took an experimentation approach, a rapid delivery. We added functional components and insight every iteration, and we're continuing to tune. So that was bringing in data. We continued to A/B tested against the old recommendation engine, and it's performing. So my key points around it are there is off-the-shelf componentry that can be used. It can be rapidly assembled, so ability to innovate is here. But actually, it's more the questions that you ask. It's how you frame. And I'll come into the gotchas that we had to go through when we looked at it. So, back to you.
Fantastic. So, and then we've covered kind of the customer-forward and customer-focused aspects of how retailers are currently experimenting. But now we'll talk a bit about the operations. So, kind of what is from the business side can we do and automate, and kind of what approach can we take to really see benefit with generative AI? And these are the examples that we've seen. So going into product generation, that's a big one, because I think you can really use and leverage generative AI through the entire process, the entire flow of product design. So we're talking about the conception, ideation aspects. We've talked about how LLMs can be creative and do different tasks that are maybe more difficult with other methods. So you can really kind of use ChatGPT and other LLMs like that to kind of go back and forth and create new ideas, new concepts. Then when you go into the design aspect, you can use these sort of generative models that generate images, like we're talking about DALL-E 2, talking about Stable Diffusion, and other models like that, and really start creating new designs and new aspects. But you can also feed it with a lot of content, right? So we've got new systems like control nets and other solutions that really allow you to have sort of control over the structure of the product, control over certain aspects, like the depth of it or the shape of it. And that allows you to create a lot of different variations and sort of iterate to create nicer and nicer products that fit the context better. And then finally, kind of when you start going into the design aspect, we have all these systems for structural optimization and other sorts of engineering solutions that help you improve the actual physical construction of your product, so making it easier to manufacture, making it more resilient to damage, making it lighter. So really important for use cases like sports equipment and things where structural aspects of the product are very important, right? So also in automotive and aircraft and other aspects like that. And kind of the big industry that we're seeing this sort of product generation is fashion and kind of consumer goods that has some sort of design element to it that needs to kind of fit that context. So, and I think there's a quote which I'm roughly going to probably butcher, to be honest. But it was around, fashion in its essence is kind of using a lot of old or existing ideas, right, and then putting them together in a different form, in a different shape. And that's what generative AI can really do, right? So you're feeding in all the data about previous solutions and previous designs, and using that to generate new ideas from nothing, from just text prompts, or from sketches and other content like that. And then the other aspect is marketing. I already mentioned a bit about marketing and how you can create a full kind of marketing strategy and automate that RPA, kind of think about how you use a large language model to create a strategy, then iterate on that strategy and go through each step to kind of plan for that individual, pulling in information about previous purchases and kind of the context around the user, that intent again that I've talked about before, and really create super personalized marketing. I'm going to hand over to Oren, because he's the expert in visual merch ops and the optimization aspects.
Thank you. So just to wear a time, briefly, visual merch ops. So fairly onerous process to lay out store, macro, microspace planning. There's quite a bit of investigative work around how do you actually lay out store to optimize return. That used to take weeks to actually work out what can fit where, what is actually optimal. We've been running experiments around how can we generate, how can we actually look at samples, check efficiency, effectiveness, sales options around it. So just in the visual merch shop space, we're active. Optimization, loadout route planning is pretty straightforward. It's been around for a while. But what we're starting to see in the optimization space is, one I'll touch on is wargaming, business continuity planning, generating real world scenarios. A lot of the effort was generating the day zero event scenario for audit. What we're seeing is we can actually generate those scenarios and extend them into day one. What happens once the events happened and you re-normalize. So we're actually using a lot of the generative technology to start to play out what the scripts are for scenarios for day zero and day one, how to re-normalize once an event occurs. Still not necessarily helping us how to handle the event, but it's generating real world scenarios that we can start to expand and test whether it's actually viable for us to deal with. Okay, I think that's probably it for that. Gotchas.
Yeah, so going into some of the gotchas, and we got a couple of ways of phrasing it here, but I think it's like Oren mentioned, it's kind of inevitable. It's here, right? We want to start experimenting and exploring these technologies and using them in like all these different potential kind of areas and experimenting with it and seeing kind of how we can use it. But you need to keep in mind there's like a couple of very key things that there are concerns and there are points that you need to be aware of, right? So the legal aspect is quite a big one. I'm sure pretty much being here in this event, you've all heard about kind of some of the legal ramifications of these large kind of generative models, which need a lot of input data, right? So talking about copyrighted content, talking about what are the actual laws that are currently being developed to define kind of what limitations are there on kind of the data sets for large models. And that applies also to large language models, right? So copyrighted text and content like that. But it's particularly big now within image generation and art content generation. The other one is the liability. So who is liable for your new chatbot, really fancy with the LLM behind it, kind of giving out financial advice or giving out certain aspects that might be restricted and you don't want them to talk about it. But it's very difficult to control LLMs in certain contexts, but although it can be done to a pretty decent standard, it's something that you need to keep in mind, right? So, and the liability aspect also applies for, a lot of these models can generate mature or inappropriate content, so you really need to be aware of that aspect, right? And the last aspect is fake news. That's a big one as well, because it's very easy now to generate all these sorts of articles that, have zero thought or actually bad intentions to generate the content. Also generating images of people, in doing different things that they've never done before, and now videos are deepfakes as well, and all sorts of solutions. Then next is the data privacy aspect. So this one is a big one as well now for things like ChatGPT. So I'm sure in the big excitement around it, a lot of people have started inputting data without really thinking about what the ramifications of doing that are, right? You're basically just giving away internal IP if you're not careful to OpenAI. So there's like dangers around this, and a lot of these solutions we need to find, a lot of these like LLMs as a concept, we need to find solutions that allow us to kind of keep ownership of our data and not just be giving it away freely, right? So I already mentioned that. Then regulatory risks are also the aspect there is, there are regulations in different locations, different regions that, are different in terms of how you handle personal data. So it's going to be systems have to be developed for specific regions, and it's nothing new, but in this case of LLMs, there's a lot of potential for data privacy to kind of collapse on itself. The output quality, we kind of, you're probably aware already that the output is not always fantastic. So when you think about the quality, when you think about reviewing, so there's still like that sort of concept of human in the loop. We don't want to fully automate everything without having some sort of review process, especially for super important processes and like contexts where it's really important. And we also have the issue of hallucinations. So a lot of LLMs and image generation content can really produce weird shapes and contexts, which were never there as an input. So it's a bit of an issue there. And skewed data sets can produce bias, right? So that's an issue there as well. With explainability, just to very quickly go through that, when you think about also the purpose behind it, right? So is there a reason why we're using generative AI in this context? There needs to be a good reason rather than just going for the gimmick and kind of, let's just do it, right?
Sorry, where's it going?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So where's it going? Very quickly, I won't kind of go too deep into this. I know we're running slightly behind. So bigger, faster, more efficient. So we're getting new technologies, new infrastructures for LLMs that is potentially faster, more efficient, which is a big one because obviously the training that is required for some of these models is enormous. And we're getting to the point now where you can have an open source, Llama model running on your computer, and it's just fantastic, right? Because everybody can have their own individual assistant, and the data is potentially a lot safer than it was if it was hosted online and being pulled in from in a non-safe environment, right? It's going to be more integrated, so we're seeing things like ChatGPT plugins, which allow companies to integrate their solutions into and their services into ChatGPT, so you can actually pull data directly from their existing services, and we're seeing this sort of collaboration between these two different models. So the intelligence behind LLMs with the kind of structured data that we have in these kind of APIs and existing systems. Better alignment and fine-tuning. So better aligned LLMs produce better content, and better aligned machine learning solutions in general produce better content. But also the alignment isn't just one size fits all. We're going to have alignment that is going to be more specific to regions. We're going to see individual alignment, so alignment to specific individuals, and that's how we're going to get these models to perform better for our purpose. There's a long list here of items, sorry. But then the other one to mention here is access without boundaries. So these are going to be everywhere. Every application is going to have LLMs integrated as a potential interface. Well, not every application, but a lot of them. And we're seeing all these browsers now leveraging it as a good method to kind of search for content and search for information in a more structured manner. Finally, the kind of new mediums, right? So we're seeing now video generation, which is going to be a whole new thing in terms of space, and also 3D content generation, leading back to the avatar aspect, but also kind of metaverse and Web 3.0. Now we're going to have a much lower barrier to entry to creating 3D content. So companies are going to be able to kind of populate their environments and create these sort of unique experiences much more easily.
Do you want me to do the fun one?
Or? Go for it.
Okay, so don't go searching for Rule 34, but fundamentally it's driving a lot of behavior, it's driving a lot of model. We're seeing models that are turning up with Rule 34, nudity involved. It's driving a lot of photorealism, and therefore be aware that what we're seeing is models are including bits that you might not want to let out on the real world as part of your business. So, key messages. Own the process, own the outcome, take responsibility. So what we found is you can't abdicate responsibility to technology, it's not refined enough. Use critical thinking, critical analysis, explain the outcome. Make sure that you run the idiot test against it. There's stuff that we've been seeing that actually wouldn't pass a sniff test because it's generating content that I'm not sure I'd be happy to leave my mouth. So if that's the case, I want to make sure that I'm critically analysing and forming oversight. Test for over-analysis. We see examples where it's actually directing outcomes because it's not compensating for actual real-world scenarios. Out-of-stock situations, it's driving behaviour where actually people are buying the replacement, and when we get the item that was out of stock, it's driving in the wrong direction. I'm over time, so experiment, iterate. It's great to start, better than a blank page, and focus on asking the right questions. So finally, I think we've answered this. I won't go through it. Find us at the stand, say hello. We can go through in more detail if you want, as a short whistle stop, run through. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.